Mark Reynolds had always believed in the American dream. A cozy house with a white picket fence, quiet streets where children played, and neighbors who nodded hello on evening walks. For nearly a decade, his family had called Willow Creek Estates home, a community tightly regulated by the local homeowners association, the HOA. They'd followed every rule, from lawn care standards to holiday decoration schedules, trusting the HOA to maintain the neighborhood's charm. Until the day everything changed. It was a gray Thursday morning when the ominous envelope arrived. Mark found it slipped under the front door as he headed out to work, the official HOA seal glaring back at him. His heart sank. He tore it open and skimmed the contents. A letter from the HOA board citing his family's unauthorized garden. Ornament. A small, hand-carved statue of an eagle perched defiantly on a rock near the flower bed. The letter demanded its immediate removal and warned of escalating fines if ignored. At first, Mark chuckled nervously. How could a little statue cause so much trouble? But the tone of the letter felt different. Cold, calculated, almost like a warning rather than a simple enforcement. It wasn't just about the statue. Something deeper was going on. Later that evening, Mark sat around the dinner table with his wife, Lisa, and their 2 kids, struggling to explain the letter without sounding alarmed. But the tension was palpable. Lisa's eyes narrowed as she wondered aloud if the HOA had taken a sudden hardline stance for reasons beyond rules and regulations. "We've always followed their rules," Mark said, trying to reassure everyone. "Maybe it's just one of those bureaucratic mix-ups." But Lisa shook her head, a shadow of unease crossing her face. "Mark, I don't think it's a mix-up. They've never cared this much about a garden statue before. This feels personal." That night, Mark couldn't sleep. The house that once felt like a sanctuary now seemed suffocating, weighed down by the looming threat of escalating conflict. His mind churned with questions. Why target his family now? Had they unknowingly stepped on someone's toes in the HOA? Or was it something else, something bigger? The next morning, Mark decided to attend the HOA meeting, hoping to clear the air and settle the matter quickly. As he walked into the community center, a familiar but cold atmosphere greeted him. The room buzzed with hushed conversations, but the usual warmth was gone. Board members sat stiffly at the front, their faces unreadable. Mark took a deep breath and stepped forward to address the board. "I received your letter about the statue. I'm happy to comply, but I'd appreciate understanding why it's suddenly an issue." The board president, a stern woman named Carol, fixed Mark with a piercing gaze. "Mr. Reynolds, the rules are clear. That statue violates the community's aesthetic guidelines. Enforcement will be strict going forward." Mark tried to press further, sensing there was more beneath the surface. "Is this just about the statue? Or is there another reason for this sudden crackdown?" Carol's lips tightened. "This is not up for discussion. The HOA is committed to preserving the neighborhood's standards. Compliance is mandatory." As the meeting ended, Mark felt a chill. The cold, bureaucratic response hid something far more menacing. On the way home, he noticed a black SUV parked near the HOA office, a car he didn't recognize. The windows were tinted, but the vehicle seemed out of place in their sleepy suburb. That night, restless and curious, Mark took a drive past the HOA office. From the shadows, he spotted motion, figures moving stealthily around the building, setting up. Surveillance cameras and scanning the street with flashlights. The small, tightly controlled community Mark thought he knew suddenly felt like a cage, monitored and controlled by unseen forces. When he returned home, Mark's phone buzzed with a message from an anonymous neighbor. "They're watching everyone. Be careful." For the first time, Mark realized this was no simple dispute over a garden statue. The HOA had crossed a line, and his family was caught in the middle of something far more dangerous than he ever imagined. The morning sun filtered through the blinds. But Mark's sleep was restless, his mind replaying the shadows outside the HOA office and the anonymous warning. His family's quiet life was unraveling, thread by thread. Over breakfast, Lisa glanced at the growing stack of HOA notices pinned to the fridge. Fines, warnings, new guidelines, heaped one after another. Each letter felt like a punch to the gut. Their neighbors, once friendly faces, now avoided eye contact. The small statue that had once symbolized their family's spirit now felt like a target painted on their front yard. Mark's phone buzzed again. A text from the HOA board. President Carroll, blunt and cold. Remove the statue immediately. Failure to comply will result in a $500 fine, doubling each week. Mark's jaw clenched. The statue was just a piece of carved wood, but it represented more. A stand for their family's identity. Yet the message was clear. Comply or suffer. The consequences. That afternoon, Mark decided to visit Carol's home, hoping to reason with her face-to-face. But when he arrived, the house was dark, the driveway empty. It was as if she'd vanished, leaving no room for negotiation. Frustrated, Mark headed back toward the community center, hoping to catch someone else on the HOA board. Instead, he bumped into Roger, a neighbor who had always been quiet, almost invisible. "You're Mark, right?" Roger whispered, glancing around nervously. "You're not the only one being hassled. This whole crackdown, it's not about rules anymore. It's about power. The board's been tightening the screws on anyone who questions them." Mark's heart pounded. "Power? What do you mean?" Roger lowered his voice. "There's more going on behind the scenes. The board's hiding things. Money, favors, even lawsuits to silence people. If you push back, you'll be buried in fines or worse." Mark felt the weight of the unspoken threat settle over him. He looked around, the manicured lawns, the children playing down the street, and realized the neighborhood he loved was a facade, a carefully controlled prison. That evening, the Reynolds family gathered in the living room, voices low and tense. Lisa looked at Mark, eyes shining with worry. "Maybe we should just remove the statue. It's not worth this fight." Mark shook his head. "We can't just give in. If we do, they'll come after us with something else next. We need to find out who's really pulling the strings." Their youngest, Sarah, tugged at Mark's sleeve. "Daddy, why won't the statue stay here? I like the eagle." Mark smiled weakly, stroking her hair. "I know, sweetheart. I know." Over the next few days, Mark noticed subtle changes in the neighborhood. Mailboxes were suddenly painted different colors. Some neighbors had "for sale" signs mysteriously planted in their yards. At the local grocery store, hushed conversations ended abruptly whenever he entered. Then came the anonymous flyer slipped under his door, chilling in its directness. "Comply or face the consequences. The HOA watches." Mark's suspicion grew into certainty. The HOA wasn't just enforcing rules, they were waging a silent war, using every tool to intimidate dissenters. Determined to fight back, Mark reached out to a lawyer specializing in HOA disputes. The lawyer's advice was grim but clear. "They're playing hardball. You can fight, but be prepared for a long battle, and watch your back." One night, as Mark reviewed the lawyer's notes, his phone buzzed again, this time a video message. The grainy footage showed an unmarked van circling his house, its headlights flickering like a warning. Mark's pulse quickened. The HOA had escalated beyond letters and meetings. His family was under surveillance, and the stakes had just been raised. As he stared at the screen, Mark knew one thing: the line had been crossed, and there was no turning back. The days following the threatening video felt like walking through a waking nightmare for Mark. Every creak in the house, every unfamiliar sound outside made his heart jump. The neighborhood he once trusted now seemed a maze of spies and secrets, and his family was caught in the center. Mark tried to maintain a sense of normalcy. He went to work, took his kids to school, and played the role of the calm, rational father and husband. But behind closed doors, the pressure mounted. Lisa's anxiety worsened, and their children sensed the tension in the air, asking questions. Mark struggled to answer. One evening, Mark stayed late at the office, determined to gather any information that could help. He scoured public records about the HOA's finances, permits, and property ownership. That's when he found it, something that didn't add up. The land the HOA office was built on was marked as disputed property, caught in a legal limbo for years. No one in the neighborhood seemed to know, but this flaw was a chink in the HOA's armor. Emboldened by this discovery, Mark began asking neighbors quietly if they knew about the land dispute. Most shook their heads, eyes darting nervously away, but a few whispered hints of long-standing corruption involving the HOA board and a powerful developer looking to take over the community. Late one night, Mark's phone buzzed again. A cryptic text from an unknown number. "Meet me at the park near the old oak tree. Midnight. Alone." His pulse quickened. The message was both an invitation and a warning. Despite the risks, Mark drove to the park, heart pounding as he scanned the shadows. A figure stepped forward, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and a hood pulled low over her face. "I'm Janet," she whispered. "I used to be on the HOA board before I quit. What you're facing is worse than you think." Janet explained that the current HOA leaders were no ordinary neighborhood volunteers. They were part of a secret faction with ties to a larger corporate entity planning to buy out the community, forcing residents to sell at low prices so the land could be redeveloped into luxury condos. "They're ruthless," Janet said. "They use fines, intimidation, and even surveillance to break anyone who resists." Mark's jaw tightened. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you're the first to push back hard enough to make them nervous. They've already tried to isolate you. But you can't fight them alone." Janet handed Mark a small USB drive. "There's proof here, emails, contracts, plans. It's risky, but if you expose them, you might stop the takeover." Mark pocketed the drive, a mix of fear and determination swirling inside him. This was bigger than a garden statue or HOA fines. It was a battle for their home, their lives. Driving back, Mark noticed a black SUV trailing him again, just like in the video. He took a detour, his heart pounding as he lost them in the maze of streets. The realization hit. The HOA was watching every move. Back home, Lisa confronted him. "Mark, this is too dangerous. We should leave, move somewhere else." But Mark shook his head. "If we leave now, they win. I can't let them take our home without a fight." That night, Mark sat in the dark, staring at the USB drive. The risk was enormous, but so was the price of silence. Somewhere in the shadows, the HOA's grip tightened, but Mark was ready to strike back. The line had been crossed. The night after Mark's secret meeting with Janet, a suffocating silence hung over Willow Creek Estates. But beneath the surface, the storm was gathering. Mark could feel it. A tightening noose slowly closing around his family. He arrived at the next HOA board meeting with a mix of dread and determination. The community center was packed, more than usual. Neighbors whispered nervously in clusters, their eyes flicking between Mark and the board members like spectators waiting for a fight. Mark stepped up to the microphone, the USB drive burning in his pocket. His palms were sweaty, but his voice was steady. "I have evidence," he began. "Proof that the HOA board is not just enforcing rules. They're conspiring with developers to force us out and profit from our homes. This community deserves to know the truth." The room fell deathly silent. Board President Carroll's face twisted with anger. "That's a serious accusation, Mr. Reynolds. Do you have any proof, or is this just hearsay to stir trouble?" Mark glanced at the USB drive, debating whether to pull it out. Before he could decide, Carol raised her voice. "We won't stand for baseless attacks against this board. Mr. Reynolds, your fines have already doubled. Any further defiance will result in immediate legal action." A few neighbors shifted, uncomfortably. Some avoided Mark's gaze, others whispered among themselves. The atmosphere thickened with unease. The board had painted him as a troublemaker, an outcast. As Mark stepped down, a sharp voice cut through the murmurs. "Mark," called Roger, the quiet neighbor from before. "You're not alone. Many of us want the truth, but we're scared." Mark met Roger's eyes and nodded, feeling a surge of hope. But just as he was about to speak again, the community center doors slammed open. Uniformed officers entered, their presence sudden and jarring. Carol approached them quickly, whispering something that made their expressions harden. "We have a complaint here," an officer announced. "Mr. Reynolds, you are under investigation for vandalism and trespassing on HOA property." Gasps echoed through the room. Mark froze. "This is ridiculous," he protested. "I haven't done anything illegal." Carol smiled coldly. "You'll have your chance to prove that in court." Outside, Mark's car was being towed. The black SUV he'd seen lurking for weeks was parked nearby, its windows darkened like a silent sentinel. As Mark was escorted out, Lisa arrived, panic-stricken and pleading, "Mark, come home! This isn't worth it!" But Mark's resolve only hardened. "They're trying to break us," he said quietly. "I won't let them win." Back home, the Reynolds family felt the walls closing in. The HOA slapped them with new fines, cut off access to community amenities, and spread rumors, painting Mark as a dangerous troublemaker. Even friends kept their distance, afraid of backlash. One night, Mark heard a sudden crash outside. Rushing out, he found the small eagle statue shattered on the driveway, pieces strewn like casualties of a silent war. Lisa cried, holding their children close. "They're sending a message. We need to be careful." Mark knelt among the ruins, fury and determination burning in his eyes. The HOA had crossed a line that could no longer be ignored. As the weeks passed, the intimidation escalated. Surveillance cameras appeared around their home. Unknown vehicles patrolled the streets. Late at night, the Reynolds family lived in a constant state of alert. Yet beneath the fear, something new took root, a stubborn spark of rebellion. Mark wasn't just fighting for a statue or a yard. He was fighting for his family, for justice, for their home, and he knew the only way forward was to strike back in a way the HOA never expected. The weight of the HOA's relentless assault pressed on Mark like a vice. Every day brought new obstacles, legal threats, whispered warnings, and a creeping sense that the neighborhood had turned into a battleground. But beneath the surface, of fear and frustration, a fierce determination ignited inside him. Mark sat at his kitchen table, the broken eagle statue's shattered pieces in front of him. It wasn't just a symbol anymore, it was a call to action. He couldn't let the HOA's shadow smother his family's life. They had crossed a line. Now it was time to draw one back. That night, Mark pored over the documents Janet had given him. The emails, contracts, and permits revealed a pattern of corruption tied to the HOA office itself. It turned out the office was built on land whose ownership was legally murky, a disputed plot tangled in a web of unfinished paperwork and questionable approvals. If Mark could expose this flaw and leverage it, the entire HOA leadership would be vulnerable. The power they wielded depended on the legitimacy of that office, their seat of control. Take down the office, and he could strike at the heart of their empire. But Mark knew the risks. Taking such drastic action would make him an outright enemy. It wasn't just about garden statues anymore. It was war. He began formulating a plan, one that required stealth, precision, and allies he could trust. Mark reached out to a few neighbors, quiet, frustrated residents like Roger, who had also suffered under the HOA's heavy hand. They met in secret, sharing stories of fines, intimidation, and fear. "We're all trapped," Roger said, voice low. "But if we don't act, they'll keep tightening the noose until no one can breathe," Mark nodded. "The office is the key. If we can shut it down, we send a message. No more fear, No more control. The group devised a risky strategy. They would gather tools and equipment, act under cover of darkness, and dismantle the office. Not to destroy the community, but to reclaim it. To force the HOA to negotiate on fair terms. The nights leading up to the plan were tense. Mark's family noticed his restless energy. Lisa pleaded for caution, fear evident in her eyes. "Please, Mark, think about the kids. Is this really worth it?" But Mark's resolve was unshakable. "If we don't do this, they'll destroy everything we love." The neighborhood buzzed with quiet unease. Rumors swirled that something was about to happen. Whispers of rebellion against the oppressive HOA regime. On the eve of their plan, Mark stood in the shadows outside the HOA office. The building loomed, its windows dark and silent. A fortress of control that had tormented his family and neighbors for too long. With a deep breath, Mark and his small group of allies moved into position. They worked swiftly, tearing through fences and disabling security cameras with practiced precision. Heavy machinery rumbled softly as they began dismantling the structure, walls giving way, glass shattering, and concrete crumbling. It wasn't vandalism. It was justice. As the office fell, Mark felt a surge of liberation. This was more than an act of defiance. It was a declaration. The line had been crossed, and now it was the HOA's turn to feel the consequences. But just as they finished, the distant wail of sirens pierced the night air. Time was running out. Mark's heart pounded as they fled the scene, leaving behind the flattened ruins and a freshly paved surface, a stark statement that the old order was no more. The battle had only just begun. The night air was thick with anticipation, a heavy stillness broken only by the distant hum of city lights and the faint rustle of leaves. Mark's hands trembled as he gripped the steering wheel, eyes locked on the silhouette of the HOA office looming ahead. Behind him, the small group of neighbors followed silently in their cars, shadows slipping through the dark like ghosts. Everything had led to this moment. Mark glanced in the rearview mirror. The black SUV was nowhere in sight. For once, they had shaken their watchers. They pulled up quietly on the cracked pavement beside the office. The building, once a symbol of their oppression, now looked vulnerable, its steel and glass facade waiting to be broken. Mark signaled the team, and they slipped out of their cars like shadows, moving swiftly toward the back where the fencing was weakest. Every step was calculated, every breath held tight. Mark's heart thundered in his chest as the group began dismantling security cameras, disabling alarms. The weight of what they were about to do pressed down on them, but the fire inside burned brighter than fear. The heavy machinery they'd procured roared to life. A rented bulldozer and a small excavator, instruments of liberation wielded with grim purpose. Mark climbed onto the bulldozer first, the vehicle's weight solid beneath him. His fingers worked the controls with practiced ease. The machine lurched forward, metal scraping against concrete, a sound that echoed like a drumbeat of rebellion. Walls crumbled beneath the bulldozer's relentless force, glass shattered, spraying like frozen rain. The HOA office, a fortress that had held sway over their lives, began to fall piece by piece. Behind him, the excavator tore through fencing and security poles, creating chaos in the quiet night. The group moved with coordinated precision, each strike deliberate, a message broadcast without words. Enough. But just as the final wall gave way, a flash of headlights swept across the scene, police cars, lights flashing in a blue-red strobe. The sirens screamed, piercing the night. "Go! Go!" Mark shouted, urgency rising like a tidal wave. The group scrambled into their cars, engines roaring to life. Mark slammed the bulldozer into reverse, the machine groaning under the strain as he backed away. The black SUV appeared again, blocking the main exit, its dark windows impenetrable. Mark's throat tightened. It wasn't just the police anymore. The HOA had allies. Trapped for a heartbeat, Mark's mind raced. Then, with a sudden jolt, the bulldozer cleared the side gate, scraping past a metal post and sending sparks flying. He shot forward, tires kicking up gravel as the group sped, away through the neighborhood's winding streets. Police cars chased them, sirens wailing, lights flashing in a frantic pursuit. Mark's hands gripped the wheel, eyes darting between rearview mirrors and the road ahead. His pulse hammered, every second stretched thin, turning sharply onto a narrow side street. Mark led the convoy through alleys and side roads, breaking line of sight. The black SUV and police vehicles slowed, unable to follow the labyrinthine path. Finally, the group burst onto a main road, headlights cutting through the darkness as they disappeared into the city. Back in the safety of his home, Mark's adrenaline faded, replaced by exhaustion and a hollow victory. The HOA office lay in ruins, a flattened shell and freshly paved lot where it once stood. But victory came at a cost. The neighborhood was now a war zone, divided and wary. The HOA would retaliate, and the legal battle looming was just beginning. Lisa hugged Mark tightly, tears in her eyes. "What have we done?" Mark looked out the window, the first light of dawn bleeding over the horizon. "What we had to. We crossed the line to protect our family, but somewhere deep down he knew the fight was far from over." The sun rose slowly over Willow Creek Estates, casting long shadows over the freshly flattened lot where the HOA office once stood. To most neighbors, it looked like an act of vandalism. To Mark and his allies, it was a beacon of resistance. But the battle had only begun. In the days that followed, the community was divided more than ever. Some cheered Mark's bold move as a long-overdue strike against corruption. Others whispered of recklessness, afraid of the consequences. The once peaceful streets now hummed with tension, rumors, and fear. Legal notices flooded Mark's mailbox, lawsuits, trespassing charges, and fines amounting to tens of thousands of dollars. The HOA, backed by powerful developers, was ready to fight dirty. They wanted to break Mark's spirit and send a message to anyone who dared to oppose them, but Mark refused to back down. With the USB drive's evidence in hand, he connected with a group of journalists from a local investigative news outlet. After weeks of digging, the reporters uncovered the extent of the HOA's corruption, the shady deals, the forged documents, and the cozy relationships with developers bent on turning the neighborhood into a high-end resort. The expose went live, shaking the community and attracting attention from city officials. Suddenly, Mark's fight was no longer just a local skirmish. It was a public scandal. Yet the victory was bittersweet. Late one evening, Mark received a chilling phone call. The voice on the other end was distorted but unmistakably familiar. "You've made powerful enemies, Mark," it hissed. "You don't know what you're up against." The line went dead. That same night, Mark's home was broken into. Nothing was stolen, but a note was left on the kitchen table. "Stop digging, or next time it won't be a warning." Fear crept into Mark's bones, but so did resolve. This was more than a fight for a statue or an office. It was a fight for their safety, their lives. Then, just as Mark thought he'd seen the worst, a startling revelation surfaced. Janet, the woman who had helped him expose the HOA, vanished, without a trace. Neighbors whispered that she'd been threatened or worse, silenced for speaking out. Mark's heart sank. Was he next? Determined to protect his family and community, Mark called a neighborhood meeting, urging residents to stand together. "We're stronger united," he told them. "They want us divided and scared. But if we fight as one, we can reclaim our neighborhood." Slowly, neighbors began to come forward, sharing their stories of intimidation and abuse. The tide was turning. But just when Mark thought the worst was behind him, an anonymous tip arrived at his door. Inside was a photograph of his family's driveway, freshly paved, with a new ominous symbol spray-painted in red. A line crossed. Fa. Message was clear. The HOA wasn't done. Not by a long shot. Mark clenched his fists. The line had been crossed, yes, but so had his limits. The final showdown was looming. The red symbol sprayed across Mark's driveway was a stark, chilling reminder. The HOA hadn't just crossed the line. They were still lurking, watching, and ready to strike again. But Mark's resolve had never been stronger. The entire neighborhood was rallying behind him, and this battle was no longer just his fight. It was everyone's. Mark spent sleepless nights strategizing, coordinating with the growing group of neighbors determined to end the HOA's reign of terror once and for all. They pooled their resources and hired a formidable legal team specializing in property law, corruption, and civil rights. Mark's evidence, the USB drive, the journalist's expose, and newly uncovered documents, formed the backbone of their case. But Mark knew that legal battles, though necessary, might drag on for years. The HOA was ruthless and well-connected, and their tactics would grow more aggressive. So Mark prepared for a final, bold move, one last strike to reclaim their community and send a message no one could ignore. The plan was daring, an open, town hall meeting broadcast live online where Mark and his allies would publicly confront the HOA board, exposing every deceit, every lie, and every criminal deal on camera. The media buzzed with anticipation, and the neighborhood bristled with nervous energy. On the evening of the meeting, the community center was packed. Cameras, microphones, and reporters filled the room. Carol and the remaining HOA board members arrived, their faces masks of forced composure. Mark stepped to the podium, heart pounding, but his voice steady and clear. This isn't just about rules or fines anymore. This is about a fight for our homes, our dignity, and our future, he said, eyes scanning the crowd. Today, you'll hear the truth. The HOA has been abusing power, colluding with developers to force us out, and silencing anyone who stands up. The presentation began. Screens lit up with documents, emails, photos, and recordings. The evidence was undeniable. Murmurs turned into gasps. Carol's facade cracked as accusations flew. Suddenly, the room was plunged into darkness, a power outage orchestrated to intimidate and disrupt. But the live stream continued, battery-powered cameras capturing every moment. When the lights flickered back on, a surprise awaited everyone. Janet stepped forward from the back of the room, pale but determined. She had disappeared weeks ago but had been secretly gathering more evidence, risking everything to bring the truth to light. Her testimony was the final blow. She detailed the corruption, the intimidation tactics, and the web of deceit connecting the HOA board and developers. Faced with mounting evidence and public scrutiny, the city officials who had been watching stepped in. They announced an immediate investigation into the HOA's activities and suspended the board pending the outcome. Carol and several board members were placed under criminal investigation for fraud and abuse of power. The neighborhood erupted in cheers, relief, and hope. In the weeks that followed, the lawsuits filed against Mark and his neighbors were dropped, fines reversed, and the community slowly began to heal. Mark's family rebuilt the eagle statue, this time larger, stronger, and placed in the neighborhood park as a symbol of their resilience and unity. But the story didn't end there. Months later, Mark received an unexpected letter from the developer behind the HOA's scheme. It contained an offer of peace, a chance to invest in the community's redevelopment on fair terms, recognizing the power of a united neighborhood. Mark smiled, knowing the true victory wasn't in revenge, but in reclaiming their home and their voice. The line had been crossed, yes, but Mark had paved a new path forward, one built on courage, truth, and community.